Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sprawl and Brawl with Kam and Sam. I hope you've had a great week and have an even better weekend ahead. My name is Kam, and I'm one half of your hosting duo. I'm joined by Sam Donishvar, my good friend and sparring partner. Sam, how was your week?
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for asking. It was a very busy week. I wouldn't say it was exciting, more of a horrible, mode actually. I accidentally poured coffee on my Mac, which is very expensive, and sadly, I had to leave it in a shop for a few days, so I was cut off from, most of the my work. I couldn't do them. Well, I could do them through my phone, but it wasn't as easy. So that was horrible. But thankfully, because I turned it off immediately, it wasn't really damaged. There was just a tiny problem with one of the buttons. Got fixed. And yeah, just a piece of advice, free advice, I guess. If any liquid touches your electronic equipment, just turn it off immediately. And don't turn it on for a few days. But yeah, but thankfully that's it behind me right now, at least. How was your week? Did you anything happen to you? Anything more fun than losing your computer, perhaps?
Nice, nah, and I'm glad that you managed to fix it at least. So that's
Thank
good
you.
to hear. But on my side, not really. Really, what was new for me is that, well, we started this show last week, so I had to edit it a bit for the first long version, and then we are also cutting every single segment from the show into shorter segments and posting them throughout the week on YouTube. So I was also busy doing that a little bit, figuring out since it was the first time. But besides that, nothing really exciting or as unfortunate as spilling coffee on my Mac. But yeah, so this week we have a bunch of interesting stories for you. We're gonna be talking about the US failure to extend an arms embargo on Iran and then the snapback that was initiated at the Security Council yesterday. We're gonna talk about the Democratic Convention that finished on Thursday in the US. We also are gonna talk about Saudi and Pakistan relations and much more. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into our first story. And round one for this week is on the US failure to extend the arms embargo on Iran at the Security Council. So last week we talked about how the Israel UAE deal was in a way a win for Trump, at least in his mind, but that was quickly followed by an embarrassing defeat at the UN Security Council last Saturday when the US only got one vote for in support by the Dominican Republic to extend an arms embargo on Iran. So now part of the 2015 nuclear deal that was signed with Iran on 18th of October of this year, an arms embargo was supposed to be lifted on Iran on traditional conventional weapons, and the US was trying to extend that. But they didn't manage to get any support for it. This was very embarrassing. And from the get-go, the Trump administration started saying that, okay, well, we're going to use this snapback mechanism. So the snapback mechanism pretty much allows them to put in a complaint at the UN Security Council, which they did on Thursday of this week, asking and complaining that the Iran has been in violation of the nuclear deal, and therefore we need to bring all the sanctions back. So if this complaint is not countered by other Security Council members, and even if it is, it's unclear what the next steps are, then the US could possibly veto it. But if nothing is done in the next 30 days and they failed to reach some kind of resolution, this snapback mechanism that the US has initiated would not only bring back an embargo, impose an embargo on conventional weapons on Iran, but apparently bring back all the sanctions that were lifted as part of the 2015 deal. Now, using this snapback mechanism has been criticized by, of course, not only parties like Iran and Russia and China, but also the European Union. And funny enough, interestingly, John Bolton, the former national security advisor, super hawkish advisor Donald Trump, pro-war with Iran, he came out and saying, no, I don't think we should use a snapback mechanism because A, we are no longer part of the Iran deal, we retreated, and it is not going to look good. It's going to cause a lot of problems at the UN Security Council. Well, of course, he's probably saying this because since him and Trump fell apart, he's just been criticizing Trump and has been one of the more successful Republicans and right wingers, I would say, to criticize Trump. So, I mean, his comments can really be attributed to that. But before I ask your opinion on everything that's happened, Sam, is there any part of the timeline or any details that I either messed up or you think we should add to give more context to this story?
No, not really. I do think we should emphasize that uh, pretty much the European signatories to the deal have, I mean, somewhat surprisingly come out against the US move quite as strongly. I was a bit surprised by how strong they came out of it. But no, I think that pretty much you explain everything. Um, the basics of the story is what you said.
Okay, so let's forget about the snapback for a second. Let's go back to last Saturday. How significant was this defeat for the US, you think? Or was it not even significant or that important?
From the reports I read on online sources, AP, Reuters, and all that, they argued that it was pretty embarrassing because it was a very bad defeat. Or their resolution to against Iran, because apparently US has spent quite a lot of political capital trying to convince some of the smaller states like Estonia, if I'm not mistaken, but they couldn't even manage to get more than one nation, which was, if I'm not mistaken, Dominican Republic, or maybe it was similar. Anyway, but so in terms of like the effort they put in, they got very little, because at least if they managed to get 6, 7 nations to vote with them, even though Russia and China would have vetoed it, they still could have said they isolated them on the international stage, but they got isolated themselves basically. That's what happened. But you know, I mean, the defeat was likely, but to that defeat, so to get defeated so badly, I think that was very embarrassing to them. So that's my. I don't know. What do you think it was a? I mean, I from what I remember from our last week discussion, I think you agree that it was a pretty embarrassing defeat as well, right?
No, definitely. I think so too. And yeah, and it was the Dominican Republic. They're a temporary member of the
Mhm.
Security Council right now. And yes, I think so. I mean, one other thing that came out is that, of course, just like you said, Russia and China didn't even have to use their veto power or anything. Nobody voted in favor of this except the Dominican Republic. So I think until then, and it seems like now they have to resort to this snapback, which did you also hear that it's never been used at the UN Security Council or that it's rarely used? Did you hear any?
Well, it's yeah, I mean, it's the part of the Iran, US, and other countries deal. So, I mean, naturally, it has never been used. But I mean, the legal, that's what I was going to ask you actually about the current problem. Because from what I understand, there is I mean, one report described it as because the deal is very badly written. But the problem is that U.S. claims uh, to have what you say triggered the snapback mechanism, right? But the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese and Iranians, obviously, they argue that because U.S. isn't part of the deal anymore, they can't trigger it. So, like I mean, you said in 30 days the sanctions gonna come back. Well, the issue right now is that the triggering of the snapback isn't recognized by other members of the Security Council, other signatories to the deal. And so I don't know legally where do we like U.S. threatening other countries, not the Security Council countries, that they will continue to impose the sanctions. But yeah, it's a very interesting. I think since the creation of UN, this is the biggest, at least the biggest legal technical challenge that they might face if U.S. continues to, insist on its stance that because it's one of the because U.S. is not part of the deal anymore. They came out of the deal, but because security councils are technically are the ones that have the responsibility to enforce the deal, U.S. is claiming it is still can trigger the snapback mechanism. So legally speaking, it's fascinating. I'm sure the legal people who are in international law and stuff, they find it very interesting right now because it genuinely can be the weirdest and strangest challenge to UN Security Council authority since its creation.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And if you read any news article, I mean, it's so clear that it's very vague on what's going to happen. So on the US Pompeo side, of course, they're super confident and they're saying in 30, 31 days all the sanctions will come back. But of course, it's unclear what's going to happen until then. The most clear-cut thing I've read, which is, let's say, if they're allowed to use the snapback exactly, if it's a legal procedure that they're able to do, let's say they use it, and then after that, the only way to counter it is that Russia or China or another member of the council can put in a resolution, but then the US could veto that resolution, and by doing that, then that's it. That
No, no, no.
reaches the end game. That's what I heard. If things go according to the way they're saying.
Yeah, but that's you're right. That would have been the case if if US was legally allowed to trigger the mechanism. But right now, the issue is even more fundamental than that. The issue is US legally allowed to trigger that mechanism? And I don't know which even like this who would answer that question, because the situation as it seems to be evolving is that because international law is largely, at least in trade, is enforced by US, Russia, China, the big guys. So it would be quite interesting. We can see basically a very similar situation to the height of the Cold War, where certain nations operate by certain rules and certain nations operate by certain other rules. So yeah, but if US insists on UN complying with its interpretation, then you're right. That's that's the situation that we're gonna face probably. Well, it's fascinating stuff right now. I don't. Did you hear about? That's example of the. By the way, things we might face. Did you hear about the Iranian uh, petrol being seized? Well, Iran was sending petrol on ships to Venezuela. Like, I mean, I'm not sure how much of it was economical, how much of it was a political sort of act of defiance against
For the
US.
for the past few weeks, right? This you're referring to like the past month, pretty much, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think 2 weeks ago this happened, if I'm not mistaken. And then the ships were the initial report said the ships were seized by US forces. Uh, then at first Iran denied it, but then apparently what has happened was that they didn't seize the ships, but they negotiated with the crew and the captain to have the petrol moved to American ships or American controlled ships. So they seized the petrol. They didn't seize the ships per se. So, this is the type of situation we might face a lot if US insists on continuing on its path. That basically where US can, it enforces its own rules, and where it can't, Iran operates freely. But yeah, Iran called it, I think, act of uh, piracy, and there was not much international reaction to it. But it's gonna, if it happens, something like that happens near China or something, situation can escalate. Who knows?
That's very interesting. So you're kind of using that example as if the U.S. kind of starts following its own rules, the rest of the countries of Security Council are not following it, then the U.S. will only have areas where it can unilaterally work to impose or enforce sanctions on Iran.
Yeah, yeah. And I will add that it will increase chances of a, more major conflict, maybe people might start using their guns and God knows what happens next. So it's not a good development.
And Trump doesn't have much time. I mean, the
Oh,
elections
no.
are in 3 months.
No, no, I don't think this is gonna happen in the next 3 months or anything. But yeah, I wonder what do you think is gonna happen in the next 3 months? Because I don't think he's gonna get a big win out of this, and I don't think international politics doesn't isn't that important in elections. I don't think anyway. What do you think?
No, again, I mean, I think we mentioned this last week. We're probably going to talk about it some more during the Democratic Convention segment that we have. But I think things have never been, well, at least for the past few elections that I've been following, it hasn't been so clear what the main issues are. And it's all about against Trump and for Trump. It really seems like to me, as well as the state of the economy, which pretty much adds to that layer, given what happened with coronavirus and the pandemic. So especially an international foreign policy issue like this should not change much. The only way it can change anything is if Trump, let's say, gets a really good, some kind of victory around this that he can publicize and promote very well. But then again, I don't think it's an issue that's on the mind of American voters.
No, I mean, I would, I go a bit further than you, and from my experience from the, historical records, I think everywhere in the world you can see that global issues, international politics, foreign affairs, none of it really matters to the local people unless it becomes directly connected, like the American wars in the Middle East and a lot of soldiers dying. As soon as the wars become like Cold Wars or they become, they use missiles and technology, people don't see or don't seem to care too much. I don't think it's going to have a very positive effect on Trump's campaign. But yeah, but it's very interesting right now. We are in new territory in terms of international law and everything. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I wonder. I really wonder.
Oh, that's so true. And if this issue was over any other country except Iran, then it would even have less value. I mean, that's probably the fact that it has to do with Iran has a lot to do with the attention that it's getting.
Sure, sure, sure. But I mean, to be fair, though, I would say the legal problem that now U.S. and China and Russia face, that's I don't know. It's first of all, it's a very new, and I do think it's the serious challenge to the UN Security Council authority and the way it's functioned, like who's in charge or whatever. At the same time, it's quite symbolic of the whole U.S. China and to a lesser extent Russia rivalry at right now. It's literally, and Iran is right exactly in the middle of traditional maps. Of course, maps are constructed, but in traditional maps, Iran is right in the middle of America and China as well. So the whole thing is very symbolic, I think.
And to add to that, even there's also the Europeans, and I mean, they're without saying so, they're clearly siding with China and Russia, not because they want to side with them, but because they've wanted to implement this deal as much as possible. And I think they really want to normalize relations with Iran as much as possible. Really, the only party that seems to have major problems with the Iran, or at least they don't want to go through the nuclear deal route, is the US. So the Europeans are also in an interesting position here.
Well, I would say Europeans have been smartly, in my view, in playing both sides, though. While they have in rhetoric and in, basically in their in their official, official announcements, they pretty much take Iran's sides when it comes to this deal. In terms of actually doing something or actually financially helping Iran or taking Iran's sides on security issues, they haven't really done much. They tend to take US's sides when it comes to Middle East security and like Iran's ballistic missile testing and all that. So they've been, and they are in it, they're not as independent as Russia or China from US.
100%, but I think that's because exactly they can't get into some kind of serious confrontation with the US over this. I mean, the US is still one of the is the biggest market, I believe, for EU goods. They know how Trump would react, then they're gonna have to get into some kind of trade war with the US over this for at least 2 months or however long Trump would feel like doing so. So I think the Europeans, of course, they're not going to be too confrontational. But I think if it was up to them and the US would go, hey, you decide war with Iran or not war with Iran, they'll be like, yeah, please, no war with Iran for now. We prefer doing business.
I definitely agree. I will add that besides the fact that US is the biggest market for European products, is the fact that many European companies they have a significant number of American shareholders, or at least US based shareholders. So their economies is much more integrated than the China and Chinese and Russian economy. So it's just they're simply not as independent from US. They're much more connected. But yeah, during the next month, though, it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to basically prevail in Security Council. If we're going to have a Security Council, maybe they disband the whole thing like the League of Nations. Who knows?
Yeah, I want to speculate on this a bit more, but I don't feel like there's any need because this story is not gonna go away. But that is, what if the U.S. gets his way? What that means for the Iranian nuclear deal? But I think we can save that for a later time.
Yeah, I definitely agree because at the moment, I can't even find much commentary from like experts on the what's gonna happen next, on the more experienced experts. Not that we are not experts, but well, yeah, we can leave that to later time, I think. All right, so let's move to our second story, which I worked on this week, and it was a very, very interesting story. There were reports of souring relations between Pakistan and Saudi, and the reports initially, like that's how basically I found out about the souring relation, was that a Pakistani general was traveling to Saudi Arabia to have talks with Saudi officials um, uh, about their relationship. In the initial reports, it was mentioned that it was mainly focused on defense issues, and then that got me into the whole Saudi-Pakistan relation because traditionally they've been, they are very, very strong allies. In even it's been a joke somewhat within, in international politics that, uh, you know, Pakistan is the army of Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia funds the Pakistani government so much. So I got into that, and it was fascinating to see how changing international politics is affecting Pakistani-Saudi relations, and it's very multifaceted. But just to give a quick update on the general visit, the general visit was quite a disappointment. He ended up meeting with basically a chief of staff and the deputy defense minister. So he was snubbed the meeting with Mohammed bin Salman or even the minister himself. So that trip seems to have not worked. But yeah, but did you hear anything about that? Any coverage of that in any news channel?
No, not at all. And you mentioned the story, but I didn't go actively seeking. I just thought we'd take it from here, and you can kind of tell me more about this story. But so you mentioned that Saudi and Pakistan had strong relations historically. So let's say what over the past few decades that would mean. But what about the last year or two? What have been things that have kind of undermined the relationship between the two countries?
Well, yeah, interesting. All right. So let's start here. When I was doing my research, it turned out that it goes back, so, about 6 years. India has significantly improved its relation with Sunni Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia. And they recently, I think about 2 years ago, they signed a massive economic deal, heavy investment from Saudi Arabia inside India. So, and India is obviously, say the most significant enemy of Pakistan. That's a given, I suppose. So that's been developing slowly, on the side. And then about 2 years ago, was it? I think you had the recent actions by Indian government to take away the autonomous rights of the people in Kashmir, the part of Kashmir that India controlled anyway, which obviously pissed off Pakistan a lot. At some point, there were airplanes going on both sides. It almost came to a war, basically. So have that in mind as well. Well, when that happened, Pakistan, when India took away the autonomy of the Kashmir region, Pakistan expected a strong support from Islamic countries and its traditional allies, including Saudi Arabia. But surprisingly, it did not happen at all, and especially after there was a summit in, I think it was in Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll have to check this. In the links we put below, you can definitely check the details for sure. But I'm not sure if it was in Malaysia or Indonesia. But there was a summit that Iran, Qatar, and Turkey attended, and Pakistan did not attend because Saudi Arabia didn't want them to. So they didn't attend because Saudi didn't want them to. And then when they asked to have a summit to support the Kashmiri Muslim people in the under the control of India, Saudi Arabia basically did not support them. And they basically issued a statement saying that, people, both sides should, calm down. There should be a peaceful resolution. You're a standard, it's none of our business type thing. So from that, you see the relations getting, cooler and cooler. Then the foreign minister of Pakistan gave some explosive interviews, sort of saying that, if Pakistan's traditional allies don't help us out, we might turn to other Muslim nations. We will help the people of Kashmir no matter what, blah, blah, blah. And increasingly, Pakistan is getting closer to Turkey, which is a fellow Sunni country with very similar views on the Kashmiri situation. They are very pro-Kashmir, pro-Muslim Kashmir, anyway. So, and this is Saudi Arabia is not a fan of Turkish foreign policy, especially under Erdogan, because they see it as a return of Turkish imperialism, and they see themselves as the first targets of that. So all these different issues basically are causing the deterioration of the situation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. The added factor is the Chinese element. China itself has massive issues with India, border issues. Recently, there were clashes. I think about a dozen of people got killed. So, and China has very, very deep and old relations with Pakistan. So China is basically using this situation to further develop its relation with Pakistan. I think I think today or soon, there are officials from Pakistan going to talk with the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing to further develop their relation in terms of a Belt and Road Initiative. So China is using these fractions to grow its influence in Pakistan. As same thing that probably Turkey is doing at the same time. And interestingly, we see that India is getting closer to Saudi Arabia as well as Israel. They are dealing with Israel a lot. So we are basically seeing an interesting new regional blocks being formed. India getting closer to Arab Muslim countries and Israel getting closer to Arab countries, China getting closer to Pakistan, and perhaps Iran and Turkey to an extent. So it's very interesting that we are seeing these shifts, because back in the days, pretty much it was the opposite. Pakistan was the strong ally of US during the Cold War, and India was the strong ally of Soviet Union. And it's all shifting around now, and the Chinese element being added. It's very, very fascinating development. But God knows how it's gonna go, because what do you say? Alliances in the developing world tend to be a lot more fickle than people expect them to be. So I don't know where it's gonna go, but it's very, very interesting.
That's interesting, but I guess Pakistan will still be quite comfortable that it's maybe, I mean, to some extent, that its military relationship with Saudi is, I mean, that's something strong and powerful that the Saudis would probably not want to ruin too much.
Uh, it's not clear, to be honest. Saudis have been acting quite, strangely. They even called back a loan they gave to Pakistan, and Pakistan then had to get money from China to pay back that loan. It was a loan for oil refineries or something. So, yeah, God, no. Pakistan's issue is not the. I mean, Pakistan's military is very strong, probably one of the strongest among Muslim nations. Their issue is money, and the question is whether Turkey, China, can they provide as much money as Saudi Arabia, which is going to be very, very hard. Nobody has as much cash as Saudi Arabia. That's the first issue. Second issue is I think there are about 1 million or a very significant number of Pakistanis working Saudi Arabia, and they send money back to Pakistan. So that's another big issue, that there is a significant minority of Pakistanis working in Saudi Arabia. So if the relations get further soured, those people might be, they might get affected significantly. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been trying to downplay the tensions, but I think geopolitically speaking, things seem to be not going his way.
See, and you briefly mentioned Iran, but have Pakistan and Iran strengthened relationships recently, or just what's the status of the relationship between these two countries, between Pakistan and Iran?
Pakistan and Iran are very odd. They've always been very odd neighbors. But recently, when the China-Iran deal got signed, Pakistan was very welcoming, because Pakistan is trying to distance Iran from India, which Iran and India usually have much better relations than Iran and Pakistan. There is Iran. Pakistan is a relatively new nation, right? And there are parts of Pakistan that Iran sees as its traditional homeland. And then there is the issue of Taliban. Pakistan has been a strong supporter of Taliban. For a very, very long time, Iran was a massive enemy of Taliban. And there are separatists in Baluchistan area that well, there are separatists in Balochistan area of Iran and Pakistan, and both government accuse each other's government of not doing enough, basically helping the separatists. So relations are very strange and odd, but Iran is usually, traditionally, Islamic Republic is not very active in terms of foreign policy compared to Turkey or compared to Saudi Arabia. So Iran is basically hasn't responded to these situations a lot. They basically wait and see, I think. I think that's their main policy. And because it's a Shia nation, there is that tension as well. Pakistan is a Sunni nation, so Turkey is in a much stronger position for to develop its ties. Iran is much more of a, Iran is the relationship might get affected, but I don't think it's gonna have, Iran is not gonna become a big player in Pakistan suddenly. Pakistan is always seen closer to Sunni and Arab countries, and Iran is closer to India, traditionally speaking. Although Iran-Indian relations are getting worse, so in 10 years, 20 years, who knows? But in immediate future, I don't think so.
Yeah, and I'd forgotten about the Taliban angle and aspect.
I mean, to be fair, Iran itself has uh, apparently has worked with Taliban at some points when it benefited them. But the relationship between Iran and Taliban is largely, you know, largely a very negative relationship. They're enemies.
Yeah, and Iran, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a way went to war them at a certain extent in the very beginning when the US invaded Afghanistan, right?
Iran, there was an incident where Taliban killed Iranian diplomats, I think 8 Iranian diplomats, and Iran almost started a war. This was before 9/11. But that war didn't happen. But when Americans came to Afghanistan, Iran basically there is a great documentary by BBC. I think it's called Iran and the West. Highly recommend everybody watch that. But Iran basically told US where to bomb with their airplanes to take out the Talibani forces. So they didn't directly, send forces, but they did give a strategic assistance to US for sure, for sure. But Pakistani relation to Taliban is, I mean, it's far closer. I mean, some analysts describe Taliban as part of Pakistani intelligence services. So, it's it's a very different relationship compared to Iran's relationship to Taliban. And because of those issues, I don't think Iran will develop its relationship a lot with Pakistan. But I do think Turkey probably gonna step up its efforts in developing its relations with Pakistan.
Interesting. And this rift between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, I guess it hasn't reached a point yet for the Western world, especially for the US to comment, or has anything been said from the West?
No, well, I think right now the West is so busy with its own problems. I mean, I must say I don't like that term, the West, but we are just using it as just for the ease of conversation. But yeah, America is too busy with its elections, with the Middle East, with the Chinese issue, and I think European countries, same, Corona, all of that. So no, I haven't seen anybody really. No, I haven't seen any official commentary, or even I haven't seen much, to be honest, much coverage from Western news agencies. I read most of this from BBC's uh, Persian sector, as well as Al Jazeera. These type of things. I haven't read much in English sources about this. Yeah, but it's a fascinating story, both in terms of uh, the evolving situation in Saudi Arabia, the evolving situation in Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, and the increasing role China is going to play in the global stage, you know.
No, definitely another story then I think that we have to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, hopefully.
I
Hopefully.
feel
It's
like
going to get
every
more exciting.
I feel like every story that we cover, we're like, okay, well, we're gonna have to keep our eyes on this on this
And
story.
yeah, well, I think I might be paraphrasing, but this is a quote from one of my favorite comic books, which is a very political comic book, The Watchmen. As one of them, I think it's one of the last lines. One of the characters says that nothing ever ends. So,
That's very true. Very true.
all right. So we thought we should come back to some of the stories we covered from weeks before, and cover any if there were any major developments regarding those stories, because those are the stories that interest us. So let's talk about last week. Kamiar, any updates on your news from last week?
Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up on the Russia vaccine news. So, as everybody remembers, about 10 days ago, Russia announced that it has a vaccine now. I think it's the first country to officially register a vaccine. And it was quite vague what was going to happen after that. Some people thought, okay, now they're going to start vaccinating everybody. But I was more of the belief that now they're going to start doing smaller trials disguised as vaccinating parts of the population, but in a way they're not going to start vaccinating everyone. They've registered this vaccine, but as was reported in the West, that there haven't been any phase 3 trials to prove that this vaccine is efficient, reliable. And for those who don't know, phase 3 trial is the last level of trial that the vaccine has to go through, and it's pretty much tested on a relatively large population size. Right now, with coronavirus, the talks are maybe around 30,000 people are being tested for different vaccines, which is not ideal, but we're in a kind of particular situation right now. So since then, this is kind of what I've been able to gather. So already last Saturday, Russia announced that it's produced the first batch. Now, how many vaccines are included in the first batch? I don't know. But then they've come out and also said, we're going to start testing 40,000 people. That's one thing I've read. Another thing I heard from the Russian is that they're going to first start giving it, maybe starting early September, they're going to start giving it to frontline doctors on a voluntary basis, quote unquote. And then I've also heard that in October they're going to start administrating it to the general population, again on a voluntary level. Voluntarily, I've heard that. Now what that means, it's quite unclear. But I think there's still a lot of ambiguity around this story. And on top of this, last week I mentioned that the Philippines have said that they're only going to start trials with this vaccine. If nothing has changed, the last news was that they're going to start trials in October, and hopefully by March or April start vaccinating the population if everything goes well. I know that Mexico has now also come out, and they will be carrying out a trial on this vaccine. They're also carrying out a bunch of other trials, including trials on a Johnson vaccine from the United States. So this is really, and this makes me believe that Russia has put all its eggs in this one basket, in this one vaccine. Whereas the US and other countries, I mean, there's so many vaccines being developed. The US specifically, I believe they believe strongly in 5 to 6 vaccines. So I think if one of them turns out not being, efficient, they're just gonna ditch it and go with the other one, right? And hopefully have their vaccine ready by January. And I've mentioned that this is their plan under Operation Warp Speed, which is an objective of the US to have 300 million doses of a vaccine ready by the end of January. So they also are going to start producing these vaccines before the final results are in from the phase 3 trials, but of course not administrating it to anyone. Whereas the Russians seem that even though those phase 3 trials are not complete and they might be doing them, they might start administrating to certain pockets of the population, which to me kind of sounds like a different way of going about doing trials. And I believe from the Russian side, this is not an issue for them, because I think if the vaccine ends up not being efficient yet, I don't know how vaccines work, to be honest. I'm not a scientist, but I think they can maybe tamper with it or create different versions without coming out and being like, hey, this vaccine didn't work, we're just going to do another one. No, they're just going to keep on working on this vaccine, I think, until it works. So in that way, there's not going to be that much of a risk for them. So that is kind of the updates from my side on the Russian vaccine. And today, but I also heard that Johnson will start a phase 3 trial in September, which is meant to go until March, and they're going to have 60,000 participants, which is almost double the amount of participants that other phase 3 trials from the US, including the Moderna vaccine, which seems to be the leader right now in the US, is only has a phase 3 trial of around 30,000 people. So these are just kind of some news that came out from Russia, at least in the media and the quote unquote Western media, so from European and American news outlets. I don't know if you've heard anything else about the Russia vaccine or anything, Sam?
No, no, I really haven't been following vaccine news during the last week or so. But that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just hope, I just hope all of these vaccines work, and this can be over as soon as possible. We'll see. I just hope, they respect all the safeguards. That's the most important part. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, definitely as much as possible. It really, I mean, if phase 3 trials are really starting in the US and all these other countries, I think beginning of the year there will be some vaccines that are going to be start administered to the general population. And there's probably going to be so many of them. And at the same time, I also read that China, it's testing its vaccine in Russia, funny enough. So I tried to look at the list of ongoing vaccine trials and to just give an overview, but I mean, the list was so long. There are so many trials going on. I think there are about 150 vaccines worldwide that are around phase 2 or 3, that they've at least been tested on animals, and now they've moved to the human stage.
Well, makes sense. I would imagine it's high priority for most companies and government at this point. So
Definitely. So, okay, so
yeah,
I'll move on to the second thing. And last week we also talked about in South Sudan how during a disarmament exercise as part of the peace agreement that was passed in the country to end the civil war in March, there was a disarmament exercise and clashes broke out, which led to 127 deaths, at least last year. That's that last week. That's what was reported. And after talking about this, Sam and I, we just kind of spoke a bit about Sudan and South Sudan a bit generally, and we were wondering where the oil is in the exactly now that the two countries have separated. South Sudan used to be part of Sudan, but in 2011 it gained independence. So I just did a little bit of research on the oil situation in Sudan and South Sudan. So both countries are of course very much dependent, the economy and the oil. But interestingly, apparently after the split between Sudan and South Sudan ended up with around 75% of the oil reserves. But at the same time, the country doesn't have any oil refineries. So Sudan not only has 25% of the oil reserves, apparently near the south of the country, in the south of the country, but also the oil that South Sudan produces, the type of oil that they have, can only be refined in Sudan. Not even other African countries, they don't have the correct refineries, and South Sudan itself does not have a refinery anyway. So this is just a kind of small overview. I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else on the oil. Oh, and pretty much in the combined production from both countries fell to less than half of the peak production levels of 2010. And this is largely due to diplomatic disputes between South Sudan and Sudan, as well as civil war that has been going on in South Sudan, or at least was officially until not long ago.
I see. Is there any, has the killings led to any wider conflict in any form or shape?
I didn't see anything. I mean, when I kind of Googled the headline from last week from the Al Jazeera article, there was nothing else that emerged, and it seemed like the fighting was quite limited to just to the specific groups of civilians who were supposed to be handing back their guns during that disarmament exercise.
All right. So, okay. So the situation really hasn't deteriorated significantly.
No, I believe nothing. I don't believe there has been larger. I mean, I don't. I shouldn't say I don't believe. I didn't see anything that there were larger repercussions around the country following these clashes.
Oh,
But maybe
sure.
again, follow for next week.
Sure, if something comes up. All right. Interesting. Interesting.
Did you have some? Did you have a few things that you wanted, a few updates that you wanted to give about stories from last week?
Yeah, there were quite interesting developments. First of all, regarding the story we covered, which was UAE and Israel officially establishing diplomatic ties, basically, which I don't recall uh, if at the time we had the responses from Iran and Turkey and we covered it or not. But at the time, Iran and Turkey basically came out very much against this deal, and they described it as a stab in the back and a strategic mistake, and so on. And surprisingly, at least surprising to me, there was a significant deterioration and escalation of conflict in Iranian UAE relations. There was, I think, yesterday or the day before yesterday, Emirati Coast Guards fired shots at Iranian fishermen, and which led to the death of two fishermen. Emiratis immediately, I believe, apologized and said that we take responsibility and we offer compensation. And I believe in the same day, Iran seized the Emirati ship, not a sheep, Emirati ship in the. I'm not sure if it was in the Persian Gulf or Sea of Oman. So they seized the ship there, and I just checked again, and there hasn't been any updates on the whereabouts the ship, what's going on, or whatever. So the relation, like, I don't know if this is as a direct consequence of UAE-Israeli deal, but I'm sure that may have played a role in escalating the tensions. So that's our update there. And regarding to
Oh, sorry,
any
Sam.
questions?
Sorry, Sam. It just reminded me of one or two small things I read about this actually. So you mentioned kind of one half of the deal, which I think is the real part of the deal, which is the normalization. But of course, between the relationship between Israel and UAE. But of course, it was presented as having two parts, and the other one was a cessation, stopping the annexation of West Bank. And did you see anything on that? All I saw about that, which I was saying, it's probably going to be forgotten, that part of the deal, which is that Kushner came out.
Sorry, I already forgot.
And yeah, and Kushner apparently came out and said that the annexation, at least it was quoted in the media, has been stopped for now, or like for some time, or something along those lines. But I mean, that part is quickly being forgotten, it seemed, of course, as predicted.
No, the only thing regarding that part of the deal that I remember, I think I saw something about Jared Kushner saying it's a pause or something. But that's, from what I understood, Netanyahu seemed to confirm again and again that it's merely a pause, not even a suspension, and he's definitely gonna he's definitely gonna try to annex the West Bank or something. So I mean, so yeah, I didn't follow up on that part of the deal too much.
No, exactly. I mean, apparently the official position of the Israelis is that they're going to annex, what, 30%? I saw this number in the West Bank, and yeah, nothing has changed in that regard.
Yeah. So yeah. I think it later on it will be categorized not as a deal, but as a basically UAE and Israel establishing diplomatic ties. That's my view, at least anyway. But did you have any questions or anything? Otherwise, I can give you the updates on the other news story.
No, I think. Please go ahead.
Sure. Well, in Lebanon, the situation, I mean, it's just simply it's slowly deteriorating. It's not really much of an update, but there has been, protest, and I think I'm not sure if this is in light of public health or in light of the protest, but I think yesterday Lebanese government announced 2 weeks of lockdown because of corona virus, but obviously it may also be because of the protest as well. And at the same time, you had the ruling by the Hague court regarding the Rafik Hariri assassination in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, which surprisingly to a lot of people didn't end up pointing the finger at Hezbollah. They did.
Sam,
Go ahead.
sorry, can you remind me and some of our viewers maybe about who exactly was assassinated and when?
Sure. Rafik Hariri was a prime minister of Lebanon, former prime minister of Lebanon, and the father of the current prime minister of Lebanon. And he was assassinated uh, by what the experts claim to be a car bomb in Lebanon. And he was a prime minister which was credited with ending this Lebanese civil war. And then his assassination led to massive protest in Lebanon, which then led to the withdrawal of Syrian forces, I believe, after 29 years. So his assassination was a very important watershed moment, you could argue. And but since his death, nobody knows, who's responsible. There was, I believe, a internal inquiry within Lebanon led by an Australian police officer, and I think they found Hezbollah to be guilty, but Hezbollah doesn't recognize the ruling from that inquiry. And then it went to the International Court, and in Hague, they, after I believe 4 or 5 years of, consideration and all that, they finally they found some individuals guilty, but they didn't find Hezbollah leadership or Syrian government responsible. Generally speaking, the Western countries, and the Sunni groups, they tend to blame Hezbollah and Syrian government for the bombing and for the killing.
Because this had happened in 2006, right? This was way before, well, not way before, but 3 to 4 years before the Syrian civil war. So they were active in Israel, the Syrians.
Yeah. Oh, there was Syrian army presence in Libya, in Lebanon, sorry. So yeah, they were very active. And also because Rafik Hariri was considered an ally of Saudi Arabia, and Sunnis and the Western countries. He had dual citizenships, as it is, I think, famously it's known. They have the Hariri family has significant economic ties with Saudi Arabia, so they blame the Hezbollah and Syrian government. Hezbollah and Syrian government blamed Israel and Western powers. Their argument is that they wanted conflict in Lebanon, they wanted unrest in Lebanon, and they wanted Syrian forces out from Lebanon, which they argue happened as a result. So, both sides accuse each other. But the ruling was interesting in that it didn't really point a finger at Hezbollah or anybody except some individuals. And, in real terms, it probably has no significant consequence because Hezbollah doesn't even recognize their authority. But, just the continued...
Sorry, Hezbollah doesn't recognize the authority of the Hague?
No, they don't. No. They largely see it as a, American-backed organization and all that. So, yeah. But yeah, that's the evolving situation in Lebanon as a whole, really. And We'll see. Maybe it will have some consequences. Who knows?
And
But
Hariri's
yeah,
sorry, and Hariri's son, who is now the current prime minister in Lebanon, he's the same one who was arrested in Saudi Arabia or something along those lines, and he was kept in a hotel.
I think for 2 weeks he was a guest cameo. I don't know where do you get these ideas of arrest and imprisoned and all that. He was an honored guest. He was drinking tea and everything. No, no, and I would add that even the pretext for his arrest in Saudi Arabia was his company's debt in Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, the ties between Hariri family and Saudi Arabia are very, very deep. But that arrest may have actually pushed Saad Hariri more into the arms of Iran and Hezbollah.
See, very interesting. Okay, I think we're done with updates, no?
Yeah, I think so. I'm done.
Okay, so that's it for this part of the show about last week, and we're gonna continue with round three for this episode, and that's on the Democratic Convention. Sam, do you wanna give a quick overview?
Sure, yeah. Well, the Democratic Convention took place. I think that's as quick as it can take place. And I don't know, to be completely honest, I didn't watch the convention itself live, like, all the time. I mean, time difference was one of the issues, but major issue was how boring it was going to be. And so I mostly watched bits and pieces, and I read about the coverage, and I read the speeches and all that. As a whole, I must say I found it even more disappointing than what I expected. I mean, the political conventions in America are always, in my view, boring, and it's a dog and pony show. It's nothing real. It's all phony talk. But this time, they really didn't go near any policy. It was just about values and, oh, we are good people, Trump is a bad person. The speech that got the best reviews and even the critics argued was the best speech of the convention was from Jill Stein. And she mainly talked about how life after Corona has been very tough, and schools and students can go back and all that. So in that, at least in the previous conventions, the lip service was paid to people who are interested in policy, and they would promise all these crazy policies that they will never put into place, like helping the poor or something like that. Some crazy idea like that. But this time it was just just show. It was just show. And yeah, I genuinely didn't really enjoy it. For me, the most personally, I hated the I don't know if you know her. Oh, you definitely know her, because you, like me, are a big fan of Seinfeld. But Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Elaine from Seinfeld, she she did a little. I think she introduced. Who did she introduce? I forget. Anyway, but she did a small segment, and same topics about, oh, we got, if we get together, we can defeat Trump and the Russians and the stuff, and the whole, again, Russia Gate thing and all that. Very disappointing to me. And that moment was the most negative moment for me, because I loved her as an actress, and I think she's just a fantastic actress and a fantastic, probably human being if I meet her in person. But I personally found the whole convention disappointing, lacking in substance, and just the same old, same old, basically. I I can't say I expected much more, but I did expect a little bit more. I don't know, how did you follow any of the news? Did you had any moments that you liked or you particularly hated?
Yeah, so I mean that's really sad that Elaine was there, but I'll try to I'll try to forget about that. No, but just like you, of course, I didn't watch the convention either. I mean, why would you why would you watch that? But I tried to follow the news coverage, and to me, I mean, it just seemed like their message was in a way clear, and that's that, hey, we're getting the band back together, so to speak. You know, Obamas were prominent, of course. Hillary Clinton spoke, of course. Kerry was there, of course. They give Alessandra Cortez.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Alessandro Ocasio-Cortez, who is probably one of, regardless of what you think, one of the more exciting and popular Democrats right now in Congress. They just gave her a minute, and during that time, she had to, it was part of the procedure, but she had to kind of nominate uh, Bernie Sanders. And in a way, that kind of looked like a setup. It made her look like, we give her even a minute, and even during that time, she's not, saying that I support Biden, which is apparently a very normal part of the convention, and she was supposed to do that. But yeah, to me, it seemed like the message was clear. Hey, we're gonna go back to the Obama era, as if we're going to try to forget about this Trump period, and it's all about getting Trump out. And because Trump is rude, because Trump makes us look bad. And exactly, I mean, they've completely forgotten about policies. Of course, beating your opponent, that's the first part of the election. But then what are you going to do after you beat him? That part's forgotten. I guess they would say, well, we're going to go back to being a great civil nation. I guess that is what they're going to say. Policies and everything are completely out of the window. The glorification of the Obamas was, of course, huge. I heard some MSNBC um, political commentator and host, I mean, talking about it at Obama. It was just so moving. He talked about how wrong it is what Trump is doing. They were like about to cry on TV. They were just moved by it. And then it kind of also made me think how, at least in 2016, the elections were so much more exciting. I think Bernie Sanders was in it until the end, and in this time, I mean, how things have flipped around from a year ago is absolutely insane. I mean, Kamala Harris, she didn't even make the voting round. She left the campaign. She stopped her campaign before they had started the primaries. So she had lost so early. Biden was just losing. He lost the first 3 or 4 primaries. Everything was going Bernie's way, it seemed. And then how things have just turned around and shifted completely since then. It's just so sad.
Yeah, well, sad from our point of view, of
Sad
course.
from left or progressive point of view, and they really didn't hide it. I mean, this time they really didn't hide it at the convention. I think they've given up on getting young people's vote, Bernie Sanders vote, and whatever. They're banking that if they get the usual Democrats plus the never Trumpers, I think they believe that is more than enough to win this election. Why make life harder for yourself by making false promises?
No, you're right. And to for me at least, it was especially sad this time around because I think it was it was in my view Bernie Sanders and his campaign team's fault that he lost. Like they could have won if they had this different strategy. But that's behind us now, and you can't do anything about that. I definitely agree with you in that I don't think they're trying to win the progressive votes anymore because they've seen, to be honest, how insignificant progressive votes it is. So I think they don't see the need for it. And the way the convention was organized and planned, I think definitely showed that with Representative Ocasio-Cortez given 60 seconds and then criticized for not saying enough in that 60 seconds. So it was ridiculous. And in terms of coverage, I do think the coverage definitely agree it was ridiculous. I don't know if you saw Rachel Maddow after Obama's speech. And Obama's speech was fine. I think he's great at giving speeches. But in terms of substance, I don't think it was anything new. He was very eloquent, fantastic speaker. And after the speech, Rachel Maddow was like, to her fellow co-host or whatever, "Oh, when Obama said our democracy is in danger, I was scared. I genuinely got scared." And it's like, you've been saying that for the last 5 years. What do you mean? Like, what was the whole like last 5 years about then? You weren't scared till it, anyway. The whole thing was just. It feels like when I was when I was a kid, we used to watch Oscars with my family and stuff, or award shows, BAFTAs, that type of thing. It felt more like a award show ceremony where the interviewers, like the commentators, were like more like the people who just basically were paid to, oh, look at the fantastic dress, paid to ask questions like, oh, how fantastic you are, from out of 10, 9 or 10. It just, yeah, the whole thing was very disappointing to me.
No, I also saw that's the MSNBC clip that I was mentioning. I saw the same one. I mean, just ridiculous. But I guess that's why these news anchors make this much money because they either have to be genuinely stupid or they just have to live such a fake life. I guess they deserve it, you know? I don't know how much someone would have to pay me for me to put on a show like that. I don't think I'd be capable.
I I don't know. In my experience, though, if you surround yourself by the people who think exactly alike or within a very narrow field, and you start buying your own bullshit. So I don't think it's that difficult, or I don't think they're consciously lying all the time. It's just they have tunnel vision basically, and they are very emotional. That's all I can say. When you get that emotional about Michelle Obama or Obama's speech, it's just I'm not. It's not a bad speech, but it doesn't really. It's not like they found something new, or they proclaimed or they give us some new information. So yeah, it's not much of a news story, more of a. But
I know, no, I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. But they should be happy. They got all the pieces back together. Things are going, things are going their way. It seems. And but actually, you pointed this out, and I've heard of this too. You were mentioning earlier how I think since last week, Trump bounced back a little bit in some of the polls.
yeah, exactly. There has been some polls in what do you call them? The Rust Belt states. The states that are in contention, uh, and nationally. And I mean, there were some polls 2 weeks ago that had Biden ahead by 14 points, 15 points, everywhere in the states, nationally, all of it. Now, I think there are some that they're neck and neck, or Trump is 4 points, 5 points behind, which is within the margin of error for polls. So it's very surprising in my view. I don't know the only major thing that has happened since last week was the announcement of Kamala Harris as the VP. So I don't know if that played a role, or if Trump taking Corona a bit more seriously has played a role. But yeah, Trump is bouncing back in many places. There hasn't been enough polls to say this for sure. Maybe because if it's just one set of polls saying that, and then next week again we are back to what it was before, then that was just a blip. That was just the error. But if we next week we see similar, you know, polling and similar trend, then Trump is back in the game, which I genuinely didn't think it could happen, but he seems to be back in the game.
Yeah, he has time, and the whole thing about Kamala Harris, what you're saying, I mean, it makes sense to me. She doesn't bring anything in terms of anybody who wanted her to be the vice president, anybody who's saying that, oh, it's so historic only because she's a black woman. All these people were gonna vote for Biden anyway. So I don't think it brought anybody in that way to the table. So nobody's like, oh, I wasn't gonna vote for Biden, but now I will. I mean, at least I'm getting that sense. So it makes sense that even that had a little bit of backlash, a little bit maybe among some of the left who are gonna vote
Yeah, little bit, yeah, but 10 points.
Yeah. But then again, you're also saying the coronavirus, he's taking it a bit more seriously now. It could have to do with that. And I mean, a vaccine would be a game changer, of course, but you know.
Yeah.
The funny thing, Trump will be so pissed if the vaccines are all like ready as soon as Biden takes the office in January.
Well, the current timeline, that's what's gonna happen with the current if it's ready in January and if Biden wins. But I mean, the only thing this is not based on any evidence or anything, but I think the major I think Kamala didn't add any new voters, but I doubt there was such a massive backlash to her either. I think the only thing that comes to my mind is that Biden did a couple of interviews again, and he showed his face again, and whenever he shows his face again and he talks, people just go, "Oh shit!" So that's the only thing that comes to my mind. But who knows? Who knows at this point? It's just at this point, it must be said, a lot of people are not still really thinking about elections seriously. So a lot of things could change.
No, that's so funny. You know what? This unrelated, but just reminded me of this last thing I have about the Bidens and the whole Democratic convention is that Joe Biden's wife, she's widely thought of as being a medical doctor, and I've even seen on the show View, one of the main hosts being like, "Oh, she's such a great doctor. She should be the head of I forgot the name when you're the Surgeon General or something of the country," and another host points out that I think she has a PhD and not a medical medical. She's not a medical doctor.
He supported.
Yes,
he supported
that was
Biden.
brilliant.
Klobuchar is almost certainly. I'm certainly going to be on the short list for vice president. I don't know if she'll ultimately be his running mate, but she'll be on that list.
Yeah.
I'm hoping Dr. Jill becomes a Surgeon General. His wife.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's wife, because he would never do it, but she's a hell of a doctor. She's an amazing doctor.
I thought she was a doctor and
PhD.
Yeah, I
could be wrong.
Maybe
I thought she was.
I think she's a teacher, but might be good for Betsy DeVos's post.
Yes. Perfect.
She'll probably be pretty busy as first lady if she wins. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with having a PhD. It's still great, but they're just two different things, totally.
Yeah, she's not a physician.
Exactly. And then yesterday is how I got reminded. I saw her on Twitter, and she's called Dr. Jill Biden. And so I looked into it again, and no, she did all in her humanities. She got her master's in education, and I forgot something, her PhD in some humanities, social sciences. Again, absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I think it's a bit deceiving when you write doctor in that way. I think among the general population, doctor is very much thought of someone who's a medical doctor, and this is proven by the confusion on the View. So I mean, just that part is so disingenuous.
No, but I think that more shows you the level of research done by most talk shows, to be honest, these days. That's what to be honest,
A lot
do
of
have a
people,
problem with that.
but a lot of people don't do that. Like Elizabeth Warren, right? She's a professor. That means she has her PhD. She's not called Professor Elizabeth Warren, Dr. Elizabeth Warren. Sorry, but I mean, that is really pushing it, putting doctor officially next to her name like that. But of course, the host of the show should do a little bit more research.
Sure. No, and I have a problem with that because historically speaking, that's because I have, as you know, I have some interest in languages and linguistics and language history and all that. Because historically speaking, doctor was not a term referring to physicians. Back in the days, doctor was actually reserved for people who did philosophy, law, and that type of thing, because they did a doctorate. But then at some point, I think becoming a physician required you to get a doctorate. So that's why this, the confusion has risen. So that's why I am a bit, I don't know. I don't mind people with social sciences degrees calling themselves doctors. I understand what you say, that general public doesn't know that. But I think if you get a PhD, you deserve you're allowed to. I want to get my PhD. I want to call myself a doctor.
Definitely, but I think it needs to be within a context that makes it clear, You go to a different university or something and you're about to give a presentation a certain topic and they're like, well, that doctor something. It is kind of clear. But in this context, they're trying to make it seem like she's a medical doctor, and at first they would ask her specifically questions about Medicare for all, and she would be like, I just don't think Medicare for all is good for the country and all that, making it seem like she's coming from a doctor's perspective. But if not, I also agree with what you're saying, but just another one of their tricks, so to speak.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. I didn't know about that interview, and I would add, I think that, to be honest, the core of the issue in this conversation, in my view, is the useless and trivial focus on the first lady. I never understood that. There is this great comedian, Bill Burr, has a great bit on the fact that you never, for example, if you call your plumber, then they don't come with their wife, and then they wife. You don't, in your research for hiring a plumber or a lawyer or whatever. I wonder what's their wife like. What do they do? I never understood this idiotic obsession with the first ladies in America, and then you had people saying Michelle should run. I mean, I don't know if Michelle Obama is qualified or not, but just because because you were married to somebody who did a job doesn't qualify you. And because you were, it's just ridiculous. I genuinely don't think the family of some politicians should even be discussed in the news, unless they are equally as have as their own individual person, have a career in politics or whatever.
Like Hillary Clinton.
So, yeah. She was a lawyer, probably more. I think, to be honest, I think she was a far more successful politician than Bill Clinton, if she was given a chance. But yeah, anyway. But yeah, it's the whole thing was I think we can agree that the whole convention was not interesting for us, at least.
No, definitely. And I mean, I'm sure some people who watch this are familiar with the Young Turks, and they didn't even get accredited for the convention. And I think this also underlines last point. It makes that argument so weak that, once they're in office, we're going to fight back and push progressive values. I mean, the election's not even over, and they don't give a shit about progressives. I'm sure when they're in office, they're going to care so much.
No, I mean, their argument is that because they pay lip service to these ideas, when they are in office, they have to give us something. I guess that's their argument.
They've even stopped giving lip service.
Yes. And to be honest, in many issues, it's not clear if, in case of North Korea, they would be as progressive as Trump, So these days, it seems that progressive issues are not exclusive to Democratic Party.
No, definitely.
All right, let's go to the last story that Camille has for us. What's the last story you have this week?
Yeah, so I have two mini coronavirus stories. The first one is based on a very small study, but I found the results to be very interesting. So in this study that took place in India, there were a group of 62 health workers. These health workers were assigned with visiting residents where one of the members of the household had tested positive for a coronavirus. So they would go and visit their residents in order to speak with the other members of the household and tell them about things such as proper sanitation when it comes to coronavirus, social distancing, quarantine, symptoms of coronavirus. So they went there to speak to these other members of the household, but of course someone in that house had officially tested positive. So they had all the gears that you could imagine. They have triple layer face masks, shoe protection, gloves, everything, all 62 of them. And during the first 10 days that they went and visited people in their household and at home, 12 of them got infected with the virus. So after 10 days, they stopped, and these 12 had been had been infected. And the interesting thing is that none of them had any interaction with the community. They were all kept in separate room in hostels, and the health workers spoke with each other by phone, and they all each had a dedicated van, I believe, that was separated, that was a barrier separating between them and the driver. So they were quite isolated. The only communication you would have were with members of the households, where they would visit them, and if there too, they were supposed to keep a meter or so distance between them. But anyway, after that, the 12 tested positive. Then they took a 3-day break and they restarted. But once they restarted, they introduced face shields. And during this time, now the second period was actually 6 weeks long, so much longer than the initial 10 period. And during this 6 weeks, none of them got infected. So nobody, not even one person got infected, as opposed to 12 who got infected when they weren't wearing the face shields. So I know this is a very small study. It only had a sample of 62 people. Although for some people who have been reading coronavirus studies, this is not that surprising. I mean, you can't blame people. They can't have huge studies put together in a few weeks. But a lot of studies, whether on treatment or other things, are based on very small samples. But I just found the results to be very strong. So that's really what caught my attention. So pretty much 19% initially, 19% of the group had gotten infected before the introduction of the face shields. And when they introduced face shields, even though they visited countless homes where people had been infected, far more homes that they had when none of them were wearing the face shields, nobody got infected. So I found the results to be very interesting, and I guess face shields do play a big part for people who are, I mean, more research needs to be done on their efficiency, and they're already being worn by a lot of medical and other frontline workers, but the results were very interesting. And then I had a second story, and this one was about testing in the United States. So as everybody knows so far, if you're going to get tested for the coronavirus, they stick a cotton swab all the way, from what I heard, up your nose, and I don't know, it goes near your brain, or anyway, it's supposed to be very uncomfortable, and they have the other one where they stick down your throat. But now there's a lot of saliva-based tests that are being developed. There are currently 5 in the US that have gotten FDA approval for testing. And one of these that made the news this week is apparently largely funded, both the development of it and the testing, by the NBA. Some of you may know the NBA has resumed its season, but they're quote unquote in a bubble right now, where everybody involved for the rest of the season is kept in a small area at Disneyland. I believe they've dedicated this area to them, but they're getting tested all the time, every day. So of course there's a lot in for them to develop easier tests that are less intrusive. But this saliva-based testing, what is interesting about it is that apparently the results will come in even faster than the other 4 that have gotten approval by the FDA to get tested. And this is because the other ones being tested, they have an extra step where you have to separate the genetic material from the nucleic acid from the sample. Therefore, to perform the test, labs don't need special kits to do this. So this is why this test is even better, at least if it's proven to work properly. It's going to be better than the other saliva-based tests that are being tested right now. And early testing has shown that it is quite accurate, around 94% accuracy. And on top of that, there has been one study that's come out on it so far, and in that study they say that it's going to be extremely cheap, somewhere between $1.30 and $5, if this test eventually becomes available for the general public. So this was just a very nice, interesting development. Of course, there's a whole vaccine side to coronavirus, but also having faster, cheaper, more efficient testing is something that not only in the US but the world needs very quickly. So those are just my 2 coronavirus updates that I had for today. I don't know if you had any questions or anything to add, Sam?
Just one question, because there was always a lot of chatter about the accuracy and inaccuracy of tests. Do they say how accurate this saliva?
Yeah, apparently early testing have shown that it's quite accurate, at least comparable to the traditional type of swab testing. I'm just reading off this Forbes article where I found this information, and it's based on one study that has been done. I don't have the name of the university under my eyes right now, but the testing has been transferred to one of the prestigious US universities. I forgot the name right now. But what did you also
That's
think?
it.
What did you think of that study that I mentioned? Do you think the sample size makes it too ridiculous, or at least it's a start, and just the results make it noteworthy enough to pay a little bit attention to that study and the importance of face shields?
No, I think it's a good, yeah, I think it's a small study, so it's a good first step. So now you know, all right, this is something worth testing at a large scale. I definitely think that. But I'm generally of a view that, what you say, that, yeah, you need larger samples and longer term studies to make sure. But yeah, I think it's a good first step, and for, like a lot of studies are made for a specific reason at this for a specific time, and I think that's the case with this study. It may not be a great study looking back 50 years from now on understanding the effects of corona and all that, but it's a good study for its own purpose, I think.
Yeah, and for some of you who might be interested as to what could be perhaps the mechanisms that these face shields are stopping, so the authors have just very something small in this. This was not part of their study. They weren't there to speculate on the reason that why face shields were effective, but they wrote that the face shields may have reduced ocular exposure or contamination of mask or hands, or may have diverted movement of air around the face. That's just kind of the small explanation that they give in their discussion section. But that wasn't the main point of the study, to figure out why face shields are effective.
If I may add a slightly controversial note, I don't know if you'd be happy with this or not, but when a virus is as contagious, because I was reading an article about how mask may, cause less oxygen to go in and then cause that or this. And when a virus is as contagious as this one is, I don't think masks or shields are a lifesaver. And at the same time, I don't think a mask and a shield is gonna affect your breathing. I just think people are either expecting too much or just looking. It's like stupid details, in my opinion. Like, it's not, we live in cities with extremely polluted air, and now they're worried about whether like mask has a 1% effect on the level of oxygen going in and out. I just sometimes some of these things seem to be really focusing on insignificant details.
I mean, I largely agree with you, especially with the part that you're saying people are like, oh, oxygen issues and all that. I mean, that just seems to be really narratives coming out of the United States. I haven't heard anything official. But then when it comes to the impact of masks, studies so far have shown that it is one of the more effective ones at not spreading the virus. Now, I think at first there was a lot of confusion. People thought that you put the face mask and you're like bulletproof, as if it's some kind of like gas mask or something that's made for you to walk on the moon. But the main purpose was just to like stop people from like their saliva, I guess, like, spitting all over others. So it seems to be quite effective to that extent. But I mean, personally, also when I wear the mask, I mean, it feels. I'm not talking about the oxygen part, but in the U.S. they talk about it's not comfortable and all that. Sometimes I realize that if I wear it for 30 minutes, I completely forget that I'm wearing it. It's kind of like anything else. So you just have to get used to it, and it's really not that big of a deal, I find.
No, I agree. It's not that big of a deal. I never tend to forget it because of the heat and all that, but I don't think it's a big. It's like an umbrella or. I don't I just don't understand such a big. They're making such a big deal out of a small issue.
To
But
be
I'm
fair,
glad.
in the U.S. they're making other places, I'm sure too, but.
Yeah, I think it's everywhere, just to different degrees, I think. But yeah, in the US, more so than others, for sure. But yeah, I'm glad there are some research with at least some positive signs for future.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it for coronavirus. Sam, what's the next story?
The last story I'm bringing to you guys, bit of a combination of stories. When I was looking for stories for this week, I was very interested to see that, everybody tend to focus on the issues that bothers them, basically. So all the European news websites like France 24, DW, to a lesser extent BBC, they were so, like, I would say 90% of the stories were about the recent poisoning of the Russian opposition guy, Alex. I don't want to say his family name because I'm gonna butcher it. Navatelli, I think. I'm not sure, but he got poisoned. Sadly, it seems. And the protest in Belarus, which personally I'm not a big fan of covering protests that much, because I think you always, a year later, 6 months later, you find out so much more information, and your whole view of the thing changes. But yeah, a lot of, in my view, a lot of they romanticize protest and the opposition. In my view, not that I'm a big fan of Lukashenko or Belarus's government or whatever, but it was very interesting to me to see that and there was a lot of connections being made with the dictatorship in Belarus and Russia, even though they have very significant and major conflicts between themselves. So I saw a lot of coverage of basically developments in Russia and in Belarus. And I don't know, did you see any coverage of that? Did you have any thoughts on the protest in Belarus or the Russian opposition poisoning?
To be honest about the Belarus one, I mean, I kept on seeing, I think it was Al Jazeera's like first story in the news hour the whole week, but I just know so little about the politics and the way that the mainstream media explains things. If I don't already have an understanding of it, I never understand what is going on. So I didn't get to dive deep into that myself to learn more about it. But and the Russian one, I just, the Europeans and Americans, they love whenever any story about Russia poisoning comes out, which is, I mean, in a way, to be fair, it seems to happen like quite often in very obvious ways. I don't know why, if it was actually poisoned, why they do that so much. Maybe some internal political reasons, because it seems to lend itself so easily to being, turned into a huge publicized event. What do you think of this what I just mentioned? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, I definitely agree that if you're in power, like if you have as much power as Putin or Russian government, why wouldn't you do it in a more discreet way? At least, why would you do it in such a public way? It might be a false flag. It might be somebody trying to make it look like Russian government. At the same time, the other argument is that sometimes governments carry out these things in a way that is, they can deny still that we did it, but because everybody knows that they did it, they do instill fear. It's sort of, nobody else will dare to do the similar thing. So you could argue maybe that's why.
That reminds me of the Khashoggi killing, in a way. I think it kind of applies to what you just said.
Yeah, but I think Khashoggi killing, because of the way all the information that came out later, including the bits of the conversation that was recorded by the Turkish intelligence services, show the real lack of professionalism and just planning, just done on a go or something. I'm not sure about this one, but yeah, I definitely agree that it's extremely suspicious, and I don't know if it wouldn't be my first choice as the Russian government to do, even though he was quite an effective opposition to Putin compared to other, oppositions that had been active. So, and I hope he recovers. I haven't read any updates today. I hope he
Definitely.
hasn't.
I mean, so far, apparently, the little news that's come out is that he's still unconscious, but the doctors say they're stable. Of course, the Russian doctors are not saying that much. I would be so pissed if I was the Russian doctor who this landed on my lap. I'm like, damn it, I was supposed to take a day off. Next thing you know, I have to deal with this.
Yeah, finish her.
There are thousands of doctors in this country, and I'm the one who had to
Well,
deal with this.
they-
And the Europeans, it's so funny, this line that Europeans is saying, they're saying, oh, he's going to be moved to a European hospital, as if, I don't know, Russia's in South America, or like, as far as I know, Russia is in Europe and therefore has European hospitals. But I guess I understand what they're trying to say. And apparently he might be moved, or he's being moved to a hospital in Germany, but they're saying it might not be safe and all that.
Well, that's that's what I read, that his I don't know, his family, his friends, or his team, whatever, they said that they didn't have access to him in the hospital or something. So yeah, they tried to move him to a hospital in Europe. But if I must say, I generally think in terms of international politics, Russia tends to be more right compared to US usually. And I generally think if this was done by Putin or his supporters of his, this type of thing doesn't help, though. It's just another excuse for Americans and Western powers to control the narrative and shift it to focus on the things they want, which is sad, I think.
No, 100%. I definitely agree with that. And I just had a general comment about protests. I mean, what you said is so true. I just feel like in the media, the protests can only be covered in two ways. One is that anybody protesting is a hooligan and they're just damaging property, and that's all they're doing. They're a bunch of crazy people. The second one is that these protesters, so whenever they're on their side, is that they're angels. I mean, what they're saying can't be closer to the truth. I mean, everything that they're saying is amazing. You've got to admire these people, or they're hooligans. I mean, there's never any kind of nuance or what the issue is about. It's just, it's covered one of these two, and that's depending on where the news outlet falls on the story.
No, I definitely agree with that. And because I was, as a younger person anyway, I was fooled by their coverage a couple of times. It's, whenever they don't agree with them, they are rioters, they're hooligans, and whenever they agree with them, it's like referring back to the thing I said about I don't like to use the term West. Some things become so politicized, like the word protesting, West. And that's the thing, that they really lose any meaning whatsoever. People, like, oh, the people are out doing this. Which people? For example, during the Hong Kong protest, I was checking, because they represent it as if it's everybody in Hong Kong completely, at least. Still, the Communist Party of Hong Kong gets 40% of the votes, and now it's like at a reduced level. It used to get up to 60% of the votes. And I'm not saying that voting is the only way for to know the will of the people, but I am highly suspicious of coverage of the protest, especially by by American or European based media. I told you, I think in the first episode we did, there was that coverage of Lebanese protest where one of the protesters, a very young, hipster-looking woman, said, we're going to go to the parliament and kill them. And then, again, the BBC or Channel 4 continued to show them as these, the people with their ideals. With their ideals of lynching people, It's the whole thing. It's better to stay away, I think, until some facts are established, or at least covered with much more caution than this coverage with as I said, if you go on DW's website today, it feels like a propaganda channel because one is about Russia, one is about Belarus. One is about Russia, one is about Belarus.
Yeah. No, the coverage of protests is one of the mainstream media's weakest points, or I mean, I guess strongest points, because they always really manage to just stick to one of the narratives and they go all the way.
Definitely agree.
But yeah, anything else to add on this story?
No, that was it. Just a quick, not so much of a story, but commentary on the news.
Okay, so I think for a final story today, we have a relatively feel-good story, and that's that former advisor to President Trump, someone who was really at the forefront of his election 4 years ago, Steve Bannon, was arrested yesterday. So I'm just going to read the details of this story. New York federal prosecutors charged him on Thursday and three others with defrauding donors of hundreds of thousands of dollars as part of a fundraising campaign that was apparently aimed at supporting Trump's border wall. So the four men were indicted for allegedly using hundreds of thousands of dollars donated to an online crowdfunding campaign called We Build the Wall. So they used this money for personal expenses that apparently raised around $25 million. But instead, according to prosecutors, Bannon, through a non-profit under his control, used more than $1 million from Build the Wall to secretly pay one of the associates and cover hundreds of thousands of dollars in his personal expenses. So he was arrested, and apparently, this part is really funny, he was on a yacht of a Chinese dissident who had moved to the US. So he showed up and apparently showed up in court via video, and he was like tanned and everything, of course. He was on a boat, but this story is just hilarious, and I find it just reminded me of how big of a part he played. Two things came to my mind. One is that how big of a part he played at during the first election of President Trump in 2016, and then since then he really has been sidelined, and I feel like he's not gonna have many friends coming to his defense here. I mean, Trump already he made some kind of vague comment about saying that it's sad or something along those lines when reporters asked them. But then he just kind of said, I know nothing about it. And he also said that Build the Wall was supposed to always be done with public money. So he kind of threw some shade on this initiative where they were raising money privately, I guess Bannon was. And the second thing it reminded me is that this whole wall thing, which was again a big part of 2016 and his campaigning in 2015, how Trump wasn't even able to put something together for like a photo shoot or something. I mean, he wasn't even able to have a half a day of publicity with the whole Build the Wall. I mean, he didn't manage to really do anything that he can bring up again now and be like, hey, I said I built the wall. This is what I did. Not even something that you can use for a publicity stunt. And it just reminded me again that Trump, the only things he has been able to do is to destroy things and to cancel things, withdraw from the climate agreement, withdraw from the Iran deal. But, not even and he's been able to sign, that is true, executive orders or things such as a tax break that was done with the US Congress. But himself coming up with any new deals, anything that he was supposed to at least make something and not destroy it, I can't really think of too many examples. And even Build the Wall, he wasn't even able to put something for a little publicity stunt.
He did a year ago or 2 years ago, he did a couple of pictures near certain points, I think. But I think you're right, but I don't think it's to do with Trump so much, more to do with the fact Obama wasn't able to get anything done. It's more to do with the large bureaucracy that runs the American.
Well, I mean, Obama could say the Iran nuclear deal. He could say slight normalization of relations with Cuba. He could maybe point to that.
First of all, that's after 8 years.
Yeah, 4 years. That's true.
Second, I think Trump, he could argue the tariffs on China. That was the most significant economic policy change since Nixon, probably. that type of thing. No, I mean, yes, there are slight differences, but I think as a whole, U.S. government is not capable of doing much because the bureaucracy doesn't want it to do much. But I would say about the Bannon story, I am first of all, did they run this? Is this like fundraising money thing they did? Was that from during the campaign or was that after he got elected?
Good question. I don't know, but I imagine this was done over the past 4 years.
Okay, well that's yeah, surprising. But I would say that I'm sure Bannon is corrupt. I'm sure they probably used it for some personal use, but this is just such a small fish compared to the corruption that goes on in U.S. government. And I don't think if the establishment and the media didn't hate Bannon, we wouldn't get any investigation or anything. It's just because they hate him, this guy gets, singled out. Although I'm sure he is corrupt too.
No, 100%.
So,
I agree.
yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a few million taken from some donors. I mean, that's just nothing.
Yeah. And I would say, I like to say that although I think Bannon's role was crucial in Trump's election because he was the Mr., protectionist guy, Mr. sort of, we don't want to do any more wars in Middle East guy, yeah? So I think he played a big role, but I don't think he was that figure that media portrayed as, they put his picture on the Times magazine, the man behind the dark Machiavellian figure, like a puppet master or something. I think he was just a huckster, like he was a slightly smarter huckster than Trump and a grifter. And then because then after, you talk about him being sidelined. He came to Europe. He tried to, do similar thing he did in U.S. with nationalist movements in Europe, but they basically pretty much said we don't need him. And we have our own very highly effective racists, So yeah, he's just a huckster, and I think he's probably at the end of his career in many ways.
Yeah, I think he definitely had his 15 minutes of fame, and how much impact he had, really. I mean, it seemed like Trump got quite a few ideas from him, and he played a strong part in talking to Trump's base. Back then he was more involved in Breitbart and everything. But yeah, to what extent his role when it's unclear.
Yeah. But it's as you said, it's a good pick me up a story because at least somebody bad went. I mean, he's not in jail, and so he's not arrested. I guess.
No, he was charged, and he got out. He had to he had to pay for bail.
Oh, all right. So he's on bail.
Yeah, I believe so.
Well, I find it so surprising that you said he's on a Chinese dissident's boat because I remember this story that I think it was, I don't know how accurate this is at all, but I remember a story that apparently they were talking about foreign people coming to US, and I don't know how, but Trump was saying for sort of that, yeah, well, the smart ones or the rich ones are okay, like the ones in Silicon Valley, because he's, the Chinese ones in Silicon Valley or Indian ones in Silicon Valley that are, rich or basically they come with money or whatever, they are okay. And then Bannon was the one that was saying, no, they're not, because there are cultural differences. So I am a bit surprised by that, but whatever. I guess whoever butters your bread, right?
Exactly. Yeah, a bit surprised, but actually not surprised at all.
We should try to find a slightly more happier story for future episodes.
It made me laugh though, especially since he was arrested while he was on the boat. I found that super funny.
That was good. I saw one picture of him. He looked like it was having a very, like he was going through his hippie phase.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, yeah, that's funny. All right. I don't have anything much to add. Do you have anything to add, or let's wrap this up for this week?
No, nothing else to add. It was, I think, probably one of our longer episodes, but a good one. I think we covered interesting news.
Yeah, it was super fun. And so, just to remind everyone, we put a bunch of links in the description box for each story that we've mentioned, so you can go check it out there. If you have any questions, any criticisms, if you don't agree with anything you said, please feel free to write it down in the comment box below. But otherwise, that's it for me. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you like the content. We put out this podcast weekly, every week on Saturdays, and then we cut it into smaller segments that you can also watch throughout the week. So
And
that's
hopefully we're gonna start our activities on our social media accounts. So if you bear with us, we're gonna become a bit more, active in terms of social media. Hopefully we can engage with you there too.
true, definitely. We're going to start with a Twitter channel. So I think as soon as we have that set up, we'll share the information with everyone here. But until then, well, I'll see everybody next week.
Take care. See you next week.